Hello, I hope you all are doing so well. I wanted to come in today not because the energies are amazing, but because I feel amazing. And I want to talk about that because it's not always this way. And we are each on this journey alone, individually, isolated, and yet we're all doing this together. And even if we're not in the same phase of our journey, we're experiencing the same kind of, let's say, external pressures. There's still a lot that is very similar. So I wanted to talk because I see a lot of people, and even people I've worked with for quite a few years now, that seem to be going through something that I went through over the last like 5 or 6 years, which is this space of the unknown, which is essentially, we can call this void energy, but what it feels like to me is this kind of, not necessarily being stuck on the hamster wheel, but being stuck in the middle of this grinding stone, right? Those big kind of huge plates of stone that they would use to grind the flour, right? To take the seed and to pulverize it into something that could be used for nourishment. And that's a bit what I feel like this time, this pressure is really about. And what is frustrating about it is that we feel like we've been on this journey forever. We feel like we've been waiting forever. We've been wanting change forever. And so to come into this place again where it feels like we're being a bit contained can be incredibly frustrating. And yet we have to remember what we are experiencing through the human body and the physical is much different than what the energies are doing. So even if we experience something similar, and what I mean by that is that it's really an emotional response, right? Whatever feelings might be coming up for you now, which is, fear, frustration, stagnation, that's a result of the underlying energy. So it can feel like, because we're having the same emotions, that perhaps we're going through the same thing again, and yet energetically, it's a completely different animal that we're dealing with right now. So not to be I don't want to say confused by our emotions, but to not forget, right, that the body only knows so many different responses, right? We're conditioned from birth to interpret things that go on in our body or things that we experience in a very limited range, right? So, and I've said this before, that, the body actually responds, fear and excitement. It's actually the same response in the body. It's just the way that the mind interprets it, right? So to kind of pull back into ourselves now, and to breathe and to understand what we're going through right now is an incredible transition and transformation of our energy for the very purpose of our physical body, right? So, I come from a completely different space. I don't talk about ascension. I don't talk about ascension symptoms. I don't necessarily think those things are accurate. And what is going on right now is very much affecting the body in the sense of this glandular system. This exhaustion and this fatigue is huge right now for people. But I wouldn't say, oh, it's just an ascension symptom. I mean, although that, I guess that's kind of a catch-all phrase, that we can use. But I always tend to come from the perspective of, okay, but what does this mean? Underlying it, like, I'm much more analytical and technical, and I want to understand. Just because I get a headache, every headache is different. it's about something different, right? And what do I need to know behind that pain in order for me to move through that experience in the physical more gracefully? And I really do think that we have a right to know these things, what's really going on with us. And to just throw it into a container and say, oh, it's, it's the Earth's magnetic field, or it's a solar flare, or it's, your DNA. What does that really mean? It sounds good, interesting, but it has very little value at the end of the day. And I say this because after what I've been through in my journey, I know that there is so much more going on than we can possibly be aware of in the human, right? So to me, not only do I have a right to understand what's going on in my energy field, it's part of the process. And I feel like where I have always kind of glossed over that, or given up my right to question that, is kind of where I've almost given away my power also. Now, of course we get into this thing, well, how do we know? How do we receive these messages? That's a whole other animal in and of itself. So let me just speak to that a little bit. In the beginning of this journey, it's like people say, listen to your intuition, right? And so then, okay, let me sit and ask. And then there's the question of, well, is that my conscious human mind, or is that my intuition? Is it something I've heard before, or is it just pure source energy flowing into me, or is it God talking to me, or is it an angel, or how does this work, right? Super confusing, because there's a lot of information out there. And that answer too, which is so frustrating, which is, well, everyone has to figure it out for themselves. Everybody's journey is different. No two people are the same. And that's absolutely true, right? And part of the enormous frustration of this journey is that we do have to figure it out for ourselves. But there are basic things that we can understand that are kind of universal truths, right? And one of them is that typically, if you are, and I suppose some of the confusion too is that there's this idea that there are different kinds of light beings, right? There are ones who are more evolved. There are ones who are here to lead. There are ones who come here with a specific mission. And we all want to feel special, and we all want to feel like we have a mission. And I don't know specifically, right? That's not something I'm really kind of shown, like, okay, this person is more evolved or of higher light. Personally, in my heart, I believe that everyone can evolve to the highest levels. Is it possible through the human experience to do that in one lifetime? I don't know. Probably, but what would you have to give up in order to do that, right? So I never hold that someone cannot move from the space of total unknowing into complete and utter knowing and wisdom. And yet it's challenging because we have this physical constraint. And yet at the same time, we do seem to find that there are individuals who have an easier time hearing their intuition, connecting to themselves or connecting to source, and those who don't have such an easy time. And of course, then the question is, well, how do they really know? Are they connecting to true source? Or are they connecting to something that is distorted? Right? So it's really challenging to look out into the world from our own personal space and understand, what am I experiencing compared to what someone else is experiencing, or someone else is experiencing. And yet we're told, well, don't compare yourself to other people, but how do you have a reference then, right? How do you know through your human what is really going on? Because that's what we do as a conscious human being, right? We understand who we are in comparison to what we see in the external reality. And yet, really, the truth is inside of us, right? But then there is this question of, well, how do I know that's the truth, right? My advice, what I have learned, and I've gone through a lot of landmines, jumped through a lot of hoops, run into a lot of distortion on my path, and looking back, I think, why the heck was it like this? But then I also think back, of course, in retrospect, right, things become more and more clear, and that's part of what I feel I'm here to do. Now that I can look back on my human journey, I can start to describe this and unravel it a little bit where it may be more helpful to others who are, just beginning or somewhere along the path, bumping into these places of frustration and confusion. And what I can remember, the very first time I walked into like a crystal store, right? I mean, it wasn't even really a crystal store. I went there because this woman taught channeling classes. And this was only 7-8 years ago. This was my first introduction, my first experience with, let's say, spirituality. I grew up Catholic, so I was aware of God or another source, right? I always felt a very deep connection to Jesus, but beyond that, religion confused me. But I was never drawn to tarot, astrology, palm readers, anything like that. It was a foreign world to me that I had no desire to, it was just not even on my radar. It's like I would walk past those stores and see the signs, and it was like almost like a comic book store, right? Or something. Like I would never go in there. It just didn't even appeal to me. So the very first time I walked into this place, and this woman started talking, whatever it was, it was a automatic writing class, right? Like this precursor to this channeling class. And I remember just thinking, like, what in the world is going on? And not only that, right, it was like, well, she started this meditation, and it was like, connect, breathe in and imagine this ring of light. And it was easy enough, but I remember in my mind thinking, like, well, where is this energy coming from? And like, if I'm supposed to be connecting to something, has it always been there and I just didn't know it? Or is she calling, or is it because I'm in this place now, suddenly I'm in a different, like, world, like, if this energy has always been around, why have I not felt it before? Why did I not feel this connection? Why did I not know about any of this? And then to get into a class with other people and see that everyone was experiencing it differently, right? And for me, I always felt like a lot of people were faking it. Like it was a lot of bullshit. And I didn't quite buy this experience of just sitting and allowing this energy to come through you and speak through you. And suddenly you were speaking these words which had some wisdom, but also sounded like, well, if you're saying it's another being coming through you, but it still sounds like you, and it's still based on your experience, right? Like, so it didn't feel completely authentic to me, and I didn't understand it. And really the question, and this is the point I'm getting to here, is that I say, why did my journey end up being the way it ended up being? But I didn't realize at the time, the question that I put out to the universe was, how does this work? What's going on here with all these different kinds of energies, and why is everyone experiencing it differently? And where do I fit in all of this, right? And they say, be careful for what you ask for, or be careful of what you ask for. And so that was my journey. So I'm trying to think back to why I started this video. Yes, the frustration of what we're experiencing here. This exhaustion right now and the fatigue. very much to do with this glandular system. And the way that I'm seeing it is that it is I don't normally use these words, right? But I don't know any other way to describe it except that it seems like it's a very specific type of bloodline, very specific groups of individuals that are experiencing this right now. It's a deep cleansing of the energy, and not even, okay, it's not the energy, because the glandular system, right, is how, it's like the plug-in, right? It's where the energy field connects into the body. So, which makes sense, right? When we experience illness, or we have these autoimmune diseases, things that really affect our ability to show up fully energetically, even in the physical, right? Feeling energetic. I often feel like there's a reason for that. It attacks, not necessarily the energy field, right? But it's a reaction to the energetic attack, let's say, through the body. The thing is, and I guess this is what I want to say about what we're feeling now, what we're experiencing, is you can't get it wrong. You absolutely cannot get it wrong. We can make it more challenging. We can make it more frustrating. We can go into more fear than we need. We don't ever need to be in fear, but we're human. We live in a world which feels very unsafe at times. But the more that I continue on this path, the more I find that I don't know what the fuck I'm doing as a human. I have no idea. What is your mission? What do you do for work? I don't even know how to describe that in an accurate way. I know what I feel. I know what flows through me when I hit record on my computer. I know that I need to come into my office every day, and I need to sit with my energy. And when I do that, things start to come through and things start to shift and I start to feel better. And I share that, not because I believe this is what the world needs, but because I know it's what I need to feel better. And knowing that we're all so connected as well, I know I'm not the only one who needs these things, and who needs the support, right? And so my job, if I were to say, is to feel what I feel, to shift whatever it is I'm feeling that's out of alignment into alignment, and to share that experience with the world so that they can also shift their own reality, their own energy. And if I have a little bit easier time doing that now, or a little bit more awareness because of where I've been in the past, all the better. And I love sharing, and I love hearing that it is helpful for people to get them out of a funk, or to, sometimes people have been in a bad place for 3 days straight, and just hearing a recording helps them move out of it. And if people benefit from that, I think it's a good thing, to share what I'm doing and what I'm experiencing. And that's all we can do, right? That's all we can really ever do. My yoga teacher, said the most profound thing. Maybe not there's several most profound things I've heard in my life, I suppose. But one of the things that really touched me was that she said, you can't be anybody else. You can only be yourself. And she was speaking about this in terms of teaching yoga class, right? So it's like, if you're trying to teach a class and you're trying to emulate someone else, it's going to show. It's not going to feel authentic, and people are not going to enjoy the class. You can only teach who you are. And so when we say, well, what is my mission and what is my work? It's very much that. You can only teach and do and be who you are. And I remember hearing that a long time ago too. Just be yourself. I don't know what that is. And right now that feels like a complete fucking mess. So why would I want to be that around anybody? Right? And so I suppose this is where I'm coming back to what I started in the beginning when we talked about what is intuition, right? How do you know you're hearing your intuition? The big problem with that is that we do live in a distorted reality, right? So when we are born into that, right from the get-go, we are trained to not trust our intuition, to not isolate that true voice in our experience, right? And this is interesting, this word isolation. It has a negative and a positive quality to it, right? So right now we're talking about physical isolation, but to isolate energies from one another, right? In terms of the chaos and confusion of this, let's say, multiple voices or energies or inputs, right? What we are really wanting is just our own energy field, our own source connection, which we each have. And the way that I see it is that you really can't be here in a physical body right now, and especially listening to this video, right? If you're drawn to this kind of work, if you did not come from source, right? So I've started to understand this a little bit differently lately, which is that we think we're trying to get back somewhere, right? In fact, okay, but we came from there, and being in a physical human body right now, knowing we're connected to the light, knowing we're something more than just this human experience, by virtue of that, we've already succeeded in creating. We've already succeeded in manifesting. What is manifesting? It's taking energy and evolving it into a physical state. And if that's the case, that means we are creation itself already. Like, we've already completed this. So what is the piece that we're missing then? We want to create more, or we want to create different things, or we want to create a better experience? And why do we think we're not capable of doing that if we're sitting here right now as creator beings in human form, right? So there's some pieces that are missing, or some story lines that have been twisted and fragmented, that it just doesn't make logical sense, to say that, oh my God, we're in a human body and we need to get back to source. Why would we do that when we would have had to have worked so hard to come from source into the physical matter state? So maybe, and all my questions are just hypothetical, right? All my ideas and opinions are theories. But maybe we've already accomplished the hardest part. And maybe what's going on here is because there's so much distortion, so much busyness in the airwaves, we're just confused about what our true voice is, right? And we don't need to get into this distortion, right? Like, there's so many things going on there. But what if hearing your intuition is really about isolating this true voice out from all of the other ones, right? And even out from that voice that tells you you're making it up, and you're just imagining, and you're just daydreaming, and this isn't reality, and all that kind of stuff, right? My best advice in terms of what does your internal intuitive impulse sound and feel like is to go back to childhood, because we all have this, right? It's the childlike energy, which is untouched, untainted, before the distortion really took hold, right? Before the conditioning and the programming and the brainwashing really took effect. For me, I spent lots and lots and lots of days outside in the trees, in the woods. You know, being in the trees, I don't know. I love to climb trees. And being in the trees made me feel so free. And I could feel the wind, and it felt like the wind talked to me. You know, when I would start to have thoughts, the wind would pick up and it would kind of almost answer me, it felt like, you know. And I really, truly believed, well, I didn't believe, right? These weren't thoughts. These were just feelings. I felt completely connected to the air and to the trees and to things that I couldn't see. I just felt like there was this presence around me all the time. I felt very, again, I wouldn't even say happy or loved because I wasn't consciously processing it, right? I felt alive. I felt present. And anything else outside of that, I felt lost. And yet, looking back, I can say, well, as a child, observing it from this perspective, right? Because I can't say, oh yeah, as a child I knew. I didn't know as a child. But as this adult now, looking back on my experience, I can look at her and I can see now, because of what I have walked through in my adult human experience, or even my child, whatever, my experience, right, in life, I have this wisdom now to understand that what she was experiencing as a child was this full source connection. She didn't know it. But in my wisdom and in my maturity now, I can validate that for her. And in so doing, I hold that in my heart, right? It becomes a more resonant, stronger piece of me that, as I started to grow up, always felt like it was so elusive and outside of me, right? So, again, this is what I found, right? For me, going back to childhood and the things that I loved, that's where I can connect to that purity of that energy and start to bring that into my reality now, right? Which is that I start to seek out that feeling, which is safety and comfort, wholeness, feeling alive, right? And it doesn't mean even that I seek it out in terms of doing things or, you know, buying things that make me feel that way or whatever. It's, I resonate with that tone and that energy now in my heart. And this is my, let's say, more dominant feeling and expression and the way that I want to live my life. So I move towards things that make me feel that this way and away from things that diminish that feeling. And this to me is what it's really about, because this journey is not, in my opinion, it's not about ascending, it's not about transcending the body, it's not about going back to source. It's very much about bringing, let's say, if we want to call it source, right? Source directly into the body, directly into the physical as the experience. We experience the physical as source, right? So people will talk about, okay, we're in 3D and we're, oh, maybe now we're in 4D, going to 5D. I don't, like, that's not a, it's not a place, it's an energy, right? But for me, if we are in the 3D, what I believe is happening is that we are bringing 5D into the 3D. We're not leaving the 3D. We're not gonna, I don't know, float above, go somewhere else. But again, this is my opinion and this is my experience of it. As I continue on, I do not feel like I am becoming, I know there are people that watch these videos that are going to pick these words apart and go for it. But I'm trying to use kind of more neutral expressions, and it's really hard to do. But what I feel is that, you know, there's this idea that, oh, we're going to become otherworldly. We're going to be like, you know, just living on air, breathing air, like that's going to sustain us. And eventually that may be true, right? But that's not my experience right now. My skin is not, you know, transparent, see-through, and there is not light emanating through my skin at this time. But what is happening as I pull in this greater light, which is really, at its simplest, it's a better awareness of myself as more than just this human vessel, as source itself, that I am the creator of my reality and everything around me. What happens is I start to feel more present as a human, actually, more comfortable in my human experience. And rather than feeling that I am subjected to this outer reality or the government or everything that's going on, I feel more in control. I feel much more present. And I think this is something a lot of us have experienced, right? We're just kind of out of body all the time because it's so painful to live here as a sensitive being. And yet what I'm finding is actually it's becoming more painful to be out there and disconnected. And this is really what I'm looking for. This is where it feels nourishing. This is where it feels safe. And this is where I feel the most whole now. Although it's been the most awkward process ever, you know, because all my life I have spent trying to get away, to say, I hate it here. This life is awful. People are attacking me. I've had so much trauma. Why would anyone want to live this way? Who would choose to come here and do this? Right. But actually, again, in my opinion, the goal is to bring all of that wisdom of the energy here, to live here inside of me, to express through me, you know, whatever my experience has been in other lifetimes, whatever wisdom I have gained as a result of being here lifetime after lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. It's to understand that now and bring it all home here. So rather than I want to go back to source is home, it's like, but I am source, and I'm going to start to build here right through the physical body. And I don't have to go back to source to feel whole and happy and complete and in communion. I can feel all of those things here right now. And even if I am alone and physically isolated, I still feel connected. And how is that possible, right? A lot of it is having to change our perspective. And I've talked about this before, right? These stories and these narratives that we build based on what others are telling us and based on our past trauma. It's all stories, and it's not the true energy. So this is the other part of the issue, right? Is we have to figure out what is really true for us. And 99% of what we've been told, and 99% of the way we think about our life and we think about our experiences and the way that we label our experiences and try to understand our experiences is a little bit off. It's a little bit wrong. Because if we are the creators of our reality, and we are creative beings, and we are creators, and we are source, in some ways, we are also somehow responsible for the reality we're living in now, right? And again, yes, there's a ton of distortion. We are born into a world which is designed to keep us from remembering that we're source, and to keep us from remembering who we truly are, right? So oftentimes we roll down that path for a very long time. It's not that we intentionally created this disastrous experience for ourselves, right? But until we know ourselves as creators and recognize ourselves that way, we will unintentionally be creating this distortion and this trauma, right? So, and again, it's not all or nothing. It's not, people say we live in a, you know, this earth is this place of duality, and I don't see it that way at all. I think that's incredibly simplistic. You know, there's always this question of, like, especially when I'm feeling resistance, right? It's not, okay, resistance is bad, you need to go in this direction. It's, oh, is this resistance that I'm feeling because it's something I'm supposed to be moving towards, or because it's something I'm supposed to be avoiding? And in each of those areas, there's more questions to be asked, right? So it's not this way or that way. It's both ways. And as you explore both of those, more things start to open up. So my advice is don't limit yourself to what you're hearing, even in this video, right? I don't have all the answers. This is my personal experience. But there's a reason I've walked my experience, right? There's a reason we each walk all of our experiences. That's to share the wisdom that we've gained from that, right? So if we say, well, what is mission? Well, it's sharing your wisdom. Everybody has a different experience, right? And then there's a million different ways to share that. It can be through videos. It can be through artwork. It can be through a book. It can be through whatever career you might actually already have, right? It's not about being a light worker and just working and doing Reiki all day. That's actually very ineffective because nobody knows how to actually translate that into the body, into something useful, right? Or rarely do we hear that talked about. So what is this life about? This life is about recognizing that you are a source being. This is, if you want to call it the 5D energy, right? Bringing that into your physical vessel. And more than that, it's like you don't have to work to bring this in, right? It's about actually opening yourself up and releasing out of all these things that have been constricting and compressing you. You know, that's the trauma, that's the old ways of thinking, that's the brainwashing, the mind control, the conditioning, things we learn from our parents, things we learn from society, right? It's expanding the mind, expanding into what is possible beyond any kind of human constraint through our consciousness. And so wherever we are feeling, let's say, frustrated or locked down right now, it's to understand that there is something much, much greater going on. There is this, yes, return and through the individual, you know, we can use childhood, right? That childlike energy. But that is also very much what we might call this Christ consciousness, right? This, which is essentially source embodied. To me, that when I think of Christ consciousness, that's what it is, right? But it's different from just pure source, right? It has a different wisdom to it, a different energy, because it's all about the human here, the divine human. And that's really what we're doing and what we're creating. And of course, as we evolve, that process evolves, the experience evolves as well. So there's no kind of, this is what it will look like in 5, 10, 15 years. This is an experiential journey. It always has been, right? So you don't know until you actually go through it and are on the other side of it and can look back, and then you can describe it, right? And again, that is what mission is, right? Looking back in retrospect, understanding it through the human now so that we can actually put it into human words, right? Because that, if anything, is the biggest challenge. How do we describe this to somebody who hasn't gone through it yet, or who is currently going through it and is still in that state of confusion? Right, because it's energy, because energy is, for the most part, intangible. How do we make it tangible? We actually move and walk through it, right? We embody it, and then we can come back and say, oh, this is what that was. You want to call it 3D, you want to call it 5D, you want to call it a walk-in, you want to call it ascension symptoms, whatever language you decide to use, right? But that's what all of that language is about, right? Trying to explain it as a human experience now. And so we have to be cautious because everyone uses different ways of speaking. And even if they're using the same words, really, what is the energy underlying that? Because are we actually talking about the same thing, right? So again, your best reference is your heart, your feelings, your experience, and to find people with who you truly resonate with, even if you don't understand necessarily what they're saying. Does that energy resonate with you, right? Because there are a lot of people too who say things that make sense with the words or writing, right? Like even a lot of times I will read things and I'm like, well, I understand what they're saying, but like logically though, how does this happen? Or it doesn't really, like in theory, it sounds good, but how does this really work, you know? So, right, again, it's like we can only trust our intuition, but how do I know it's really my intuition, right? So that actually, you know, it's funny because we think, well, once I know my voice, then I will be able to move forward, right? If I just knew what I was hearing or knew what I was seeing or understood what I was hearing and seeing, then I would be fine, right? But that's actually the journey itself. Because that's the issue, right? Because there's so much here that is trying to keep us out of that knowing and out of that seeing and out of that feeling. So again, we always have everything a little bit backwards here. You know, it's always reversed. The way we think about it in the beginning is not actually the way it is. So again, you know, this voice, this intuition, it's about isolating the truth. It's that hardcore tone, right? It's like that true, and we've all experienced this at some point, where we just know without a doubt, right? That feeling inside of us. And if not, again, my best advice, because this is what I've experienced, is to go back to childhood, right? Like those, when I would just be so engaged in doing these things and I wasn't thinking and I was just in my joy and I did it because it felt good, you know? It's not about necessarily what is that activity that you were doing. It's what was the feeling, that joy, right? We all have joy. But our joy is all different, right? It has a different flavor to it for each of us. What is that signature? That's your signature, right? Your essence. Let's go back to childhood and find that essence and that signature and embrace that and love that, because that's you loving your inner child. And I don't like to talk about, you know, inner child because it gets a little bit confusing, but that energy, right? It's like when cookies were baking in the oven, right? Oh my God, I love that smell. I love that feeling. But it's not about the cookies and the smell of cookies and going out and buying a candle to recreate that scent right in your house. It's about actually taking that sphere of light in your heart that you felt then as a child and bringing it, right? This is almost like soul retrieval, right? Retrieving the soul. And many of us did. We left parts of ourselves behind because we didn't know how to embody that. Right? We abandoned ourselves. So maybe I'll do a meditation on that too. That would actually be kind of interesting. But I see it as this beautiful golden, kind of golden white sphere of light, right? In the heart of your child, yourself as a child, and calling that home now, and bringing that. And this is the driver. This is your compass. This is your navigation system. I don't even know if I want to use the word intuition at this point because it has such a weird thing going on there. It's almost like you have to run your essence through some kind of filter. You know, that's what intuition is starting to sound like. It's like, no, it's that sphere of light. That. It's a driver, right? It's and maybe that's a really maybe that's the point of this video too, right? It's not about hearing and moving on what you're hearing and feeling. It's about feeling first and foremost and bringing that out, you know, expressing that out. And in what way do you do that? And as I said before, right, it's like moving towards those things that resonate with this energy and away from those things that diminish this energy, right? Like this is the driver. This is the heart driver. And making that connection that you had as a child. Or, right, or as an adult, whatever, if you were fully in your light experience and, you know, having a wonderful life and time. And that's true for many of us too, right? There was a period of time where we felt like, wow, we'd made it. We're here. This is it. Life is good, you know, and then things fell apart. So wherever we need to go back, where we were feeling it, you know, and to gather that and bring that home now. This is your temple. This is your home. This is your abode. You are here. This is where your consciousness is residing. So you need to make this your comfort and your joy. And so it's about retrieving those energies, those emotions that describe the energy most appropriately, right? So, okay, I'm going to leave this here. I hope that was helpful. Hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Take good care.